Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Into the Infinite. I'm Charlie and I'm so grateful that you're here. So this video is diving into 5 themes, plus a bonus one at the end, that are consistent throughout A Course in Miracles. Was that ASMR like? I don't know, but we're going to roll with it. So the first one among them being atonement. So what is atonement, right? There are deeply religious connotations to this term, but the way that I see it in the context of the course and workbook is that atonement just means forgiving yourself. I think I have such an appreciation for this because when we forgive ourselves, it's like we're seeing ourselves how spirit sees us, which makes a big difference in terms of how we can see other people and how we can behold the sort of the divinity within them, the spirit within them, right? And it also reminds us that we are connected to others more than we might assume. There are deeper dives into each of these through varied resources. I'll put a couple in the description below that I've used. A Course in Miracles, the website that holds the course itself. And there's also Circle of Atonement. There's tons on here, on the internets, as it were. But you can take a look at those if you want to do a deeper dive. But do join us for the workbook lessons because we're going to be diving into these as they are and where they meet you every day relative to kind of freeing your creative self, right? Think about this. If you were thinking about forgiveness and forgiving yourself, how much more could you create? And not production. I'm not talking about quantity. I am talking about quality, your joy in what you're making, the confidence that you would have to know that you're creating something not only valuable, but that is serving other people really well, right? That sort of creative power that you know that you're here, and that means that you're here and you have a right to make things, right? There are so many ways that we talk ourselves out of this. And I think atonement relative to A Course in Creativity has so much to do with forgiving ourselves, but also recognizing that by forgiving ourselves, we're also entering into what A Course in Miracles calls blamelessness, which is, this isn't a theme, but it kind of is, but it's so together with atonement that I feel like I wanted to bring this in as one. So blamelessness is where we don't really have to arrive at situations with defenses way up here because we recognize that we've forgiven ourselves, and when you have this ego death, which is the next theme, when you have an ego death, what you're doing is recognizing that you are not the constructs that you've placed between yourself and the thing that you're creating, yourself and the thing that the outcome that you're hoping for, yourself and other people. And it's this state of separation that we tend to insist upon that we learn doesn't really exist. And that's sort of the cosmic punchline of our lives, right? So theme number 2 is ego. Now, ego, we have a much better understanding of that. I'm not talking about the personality type thing where it's egoic or arrogance, nothing like that. What I'm talking about is ego is the identities and the mental constructs that we create and build systems around that create an identity to which you adhere, in which it separates you from other people. Now, I think about this as we do need certain identity markers to have a sense of self and to build that throughout our lives. We need a certain degree of ego to function in the world as it is, right? This isn't about abandoning ship and just meditating all day. That's not really living either, right? And I mean, if that's what you want to do, then hell yes, that's living. But ego in this sense is really, I wrote this definition down. It came to me at about 4:30 in the morning once. It's the magic hour, friends. It's the magic hour. Mental constructs about who we are that conflict with the true nature of our being and the state of our soul beyond the systems and structures we've used to create an intellectual playground that defines and develops identities. It is a mouthful, but I found that this really encompassed the structures and systems, right? We live in a world of systems. So to ignore them and to ignore their impact is to sort of almost gaslight ourselves and say that doesn't exist, that's not important, that's not a thing, when it very much is. So recognizing these things, correctly seeing them, and not that there's any right or wrong way to do it, but correct in the way that it helps us to connect with one another and to dissolve that barrier between us and spirit, right? So that's the goal. That's the big goal here. And so I think that ego in many ways requires separation, and it uses tools like judgment, like blame, like guilt, right? So it weaves together with atonement because atonement is the pattern interrupt that sort of stops ego from having such a stronghold on us. So these are terms that you'll see used throughout the course, and that the course does it's a much more beautiful delineation of it. So I recommend checking that out. But relative to A Course in Creativity, this is how we see these things, right? even in my transness, okay? Even in my transness, that is an identity that I am so proud of, that I am so, I love that part of myself very deeply. And it's taken me so long to be able to articulate that truth. At the end of the day, I also recognized that that too is an identity that can, when not seen through the eyes of, the Course calls it sinlessness, but really it's innocence, and through seeing yourself through the eyes of spirit, if you, that too can become a way that separates you from others and that causes you to feel harmed and to cause harm, right? So identity is kind of slippery if we don't see it through this sort of a contextual web of, I guess, concepts and connections that free us, right? That's what I love about A Course in Miracles, and why I've studied it for years now, is because it's really about freeing you where you are every single day. So this is also, ego is also about putting people on pedestals. We do this so much, right? We do this so much and so well. It sort of happens without even realizing it, because we think, we're understanding now more than ever the importance of having mentors and teachers to guide us, to initiate us into these different phases and places in our lives. And the internet is sort of the great equalizer that allows us to find these folks and to connect on deeper levels that weren't really possible even a generation or two ago. So putting people on pedestals is also another real way that the ego anchors in our world, right? And that can just be idolizing someone, even saying, if I were to say, for example, that I adore Marianne Williamson and Gabrielle Bernstein's work on A Course in Miracles, that can become a pedestal if I'm coming from a place of ego and that's sort of running unchecked, because then that becomes a separation, right? That separates me from the divinity that is within them that I'm recognizing and I'm saying is not in me also. And that's why I idolize them. So ego can be pretty tricky, but this is one of my favorite ways to really, not ego being a favorite way, but diving into the structures that the ego uses to sort of anchor in and put barriers between us and our creative potential and creativity and the way that we can communicate freely, right? This is huge. So in addition to that, building on people on pedestals is the third theme that you'll see in A Course in Miracles, which is specialness and special relationships. Ooh. This one was, at first when I read it, I was like, no. And it was just this, like, no, goodbye, right? Because I had a lot of issues and I had a lot of ties and attachments to the idea of specialness in romantic relationships, because we tend to think of specialness as, well, that's monogamy, and that is telling someone, that's respecting boundaries, that's all of these things. But A Course in Miracles is more focused on specialness as a substitute for real love. And real love, meaning love that is free, love that is unbound, love that does not reduce you, love that does not shrink you, love that does not require you to be separate from spirit, from you in here, in order to manifest out in the world with you, right? Alongside you. So that is specialness. And specialness and special relationships, we can create these special relationships with the work that we're doing and with the way that we place our creativity in service to our higher visions in projects. And it's this pedestal idea as well. So we can see how each term kind of, and each concept, these are concepts ultimately, but they weave into one another, right? So wonderfully. And I really wanted to give you an overview of these themes so we weren't just diving in without any context. So special relationships are quite important because it's not about, I struggled at first with the idea that this was, choosing monogamy, because I've experienced where people had not in relationships and that was hurtful. And I thought, I don't know. But it's not about that. Certainly choose monogamy, make it so that you're, there's a term called conscious monogamy. And many of my poly friends, so polyamorous friends, or polyam, many of my polyam friends introduced me to the idea of conscious monogamy. And it's really about breaking down what monogamy is for and why we revere it as a culture and what it is that we hope for it to accomplish in our lives, right? There's something called toxic monogamy, and that is really where we get this specialness idea, where we haven't done the work to reflect on why it is that we prioritize monogamy. What is it about monogamy that makes a relationship that is monogamous something that's important to us. So there's a difference between specialness and that idea. Despite, some critics might say, well, that's monogamy. Some people do experience specialness as monogamy, and honestly, we live in a world where there's room for everyone, and that's what I love about the Course. That's what I love about just this time and space is, more and more we're breaking boundaries and barriers that existed that said you have to live in one way and not the other, right? So that is, it's sort of specialness and special relationships ultimately require, first and foremost, a separation. They have to separate you from your source, because the minute that you start to say that there's a thing outside of you that is more special, we can recognize with gratitude, we can hold in the light of spirit, we can do all of these things, but ultimately the special relationship becomes a substitute for real love when we are not beholding people in this place of a miracle, which is at the heart of A Course in Miracles. So that brings us to theme number 4, the miracle. What is a miracle? The miracle behind A Course in Miracles. So the miracle is a perspective shift. It's a perspective shift. It took me many years of reading the text and struggling with it and being in it and how am I going to figure this out to understand that it is literally just a perspective shift. And it is a perspective shift. I say it laughing because it's almost like, there are so many times where I was reading it and at the end when I finally got it, it just felt like my guides were like, that was a good one. So the miracle is a shift in perception, and it is one where you choose love and loving thoughts, but more than that, you choose connection. You choose to remove the things that separate you from the person you are beholding, from the situation you are beholding. And it is a moment where you step into that space of love instead of ego, instead of judgment, instead of saying you should do this, you shouldn't do this, right? Byron Katie has her work. Her work is brilliant for this because it challenges these stories that we create, right? And even when those things exist in systems, we can pull back and we can see that sometimes we do invest in the system story about ourselves and others way more than there's no reason to. So that's where the miracle extends beyond relationships. It extends into the context within which we find ourselves. And for me, creativity and creatively speaking, the miracle is a shift in perception from fear to love. And that really is where your creativity is liberated, right? When you're in a flow state, when you're in that flow state and you're creating and you're communicating everything that's happening between you and God and spirit and the universe, whatever you want to call it, you're communicating all of that. It's juicy. It's great. It's being put out into the world. And what happens is that is a miracle. It's not a miracle in terms of it is extraordinary and somewhere outside of you. No, it's a miracle because you're shifting your perception to let something in as opposed to pushing out through ego and defense, right? A Course in Miracles, one of my favorite lines from A Course in Miracles is that defense is the first act of war. So instead of approaching things from this place of defense, like I have to find creativity, I have to make, and it's this battle internally. Sometimes that works for some folks. I'm not maligning that at all. Creative process is creative process, friends. With a miracle, what I find, the terminology of the Course really frees up a lot of energy because, we're all looking for a miracle. And if it's just a perception shift, wow, every day we can experience these fantastic little miracles where we, for example, approaching a 4-way stop and, the right car has the right of way and hardly anyone knows that, right? So at least not anyways. So we approach that and, somebody goes and they barely stop. It's sort of stoptional instead of a stop sign, right? So in that moment, we can have a small miracle. And then that small miracle leads to another miracle somewhere else and somewhere else. And it's just this overflow of connection and remembering that we're all connected, right? We so seldom give people the benefit of the doubt. We so seldom really reach out to connect with folks and empathize with them. And that to me is really where this miracle starts to shift within us. We often miss the mark. We all do. We all make mistakes. And I think the miracle is returning to that place of saying we all make mistakes. And you know what? Every day is a new chance to start again. Every hour, every minute, every second, every moment that you have here is a chance to start again. And that's where this miracle really comes into play with creativity, because the things that you blamed yourself for and the stories that you told yourself about how you were creative inherently, or whether you deserved to be creative. And we attach deserving to creativity because we create these constructed ego barriers. Like, I don't have the right equipment. I don't have, X, Y, and Z thing that I need to do this, to really do this. Friends, I will tell you, I have a camera that is almost 10 years old. I mostly use my cell phone for photos. I shoot them in RAW on an old phone that I have. And most people are shocked when they learn this because they expect that you need this intense DSLR. And no, I have a phone that I shoot most of my photos with. And that's all you need. It's not about the equipment, but these are the ego barriers. The miracle in this is you understanding that shift from fear to love is the fear is, if I actually understood how much I had in this moment to put into my work and to believe in myself, if I actually believed in myself, I would then have to abandon all of these structures that the ego has used and created to separate me from that source of divinity within me. But more than that, the potential that exists for me to experience real joy, and the kind of joy that's enduring, right? So that is a miracle. That's a miracle, my friends. That's a miracle. And so when does all of this happen? So when we approach that moment of, encountering a miracle or being the facilitator of a miracle, which is really just divinity in blue jeans, my friends, divinity in blue jeans. When does that happen? Well, that happens in what A Course in Miracles calls the holy instant, which is theme number 5. Oh, sorry if that was loud. I was trying to be funny, but with these voice changes, I'll tell you, it's a little bit, my falsettos are not what they used to be. But the holy instant is the moment that we recognize the opportunity to choose something higher, the higher version or vision of our peers. And that's when we get the opportunity to really see love in them as opposed to seeing separation. If you met spirit, so if you met, I use spirit interchangeably with God, so that's how it is. But if you met spirit in the eyes of everyone around you every day, how much closer to the world and connected would you feel? Right? There's this idea of human supremacy that I learned in my environmental studies grad program. And human supremacy is really, to me, we start to build these supremacies over one another in different ways. Chief among them, well, primary among them, I should say, primary among them being white supremacy, right? And these supremacies then disconnect us from the planet as well, because we're disconnected from one another. The holy instant to me is the moment that we recognize we can actually make a higher choice. We can make a choice that's different. We can make a choice to think differently about this. And that opens us up, not just to, to smaller things like creativity, but it opens us up to one another. And again, we all make mistakes. We all disconnect. That's why the ego doesn't really, that's something we're going to be dealing with for the rest of our lives, right? There's no end state to ego, because you can experience ego deaths, but the ego is always around, right? That's sort of the condition of being here and being human, is having this forgiveness for yourself and others on a regular, if not daily basis, because you're always in this place of awareness and compassion, right? Deep compassion and compassionate curiosity as well. So the holy instant is the moment that you choose, and it's the deliberate decision. And it is a decision to see through the eyes, to see everyone around you and the experiences that you're having and your context through the eyes of spirit, right? So it's applying that higher vision to something. And so a bonus 6th theme that I wanted to cover is guilt. Now, guilt is a doozy, because super casually, it's just guilt, it's fine. But guilt in the context of A Course in Miracles is profound. It is profound, and it is quite central to all of these concepts as well. It kind of runs as an undercurrent beneath them. So guilt is... So first and foremost, if you want to go deeper with guilt, there are a ton of different resources on this that I would recommend if you're looking to specifically explore guilt. We'll get there in the workbook lessons specific to creativity, but if you want to go deeper in a more broad sense, I highly recommend it. The links are in the description below for those study guides and resources. But to me, guilt is a precursor for separation. So we have to first feel bad, right? And this feeling bad, it happens in a million subtle ways and forms. But we confuse ourselves as being guilt as opposed to feeling guilt. So we are guilty as opposed to feeling guilt. And I'm not talking about remorse that makes you want to, that is that sort of remedial or transformative justice. You don't want, it's not about pushing that away. What I'm talking about here is where we believe that we are bad because of the ego structures and rules that have been created that say this is the expectation that's now created for you to behave with this way. Some people might rush to, as critics say, well, that's, those rules are there for a reason. And I'm not talking about those big ones, my friends. I'm talking about the ones that we build in relationships that uphold our separation and our identity, the identity that we make that does keep us separate from other people. And so the ego creates these rules, and they're usually expectations that are rooted in a false self that's separate from your divine lineage and ancestry, right? You are divinity in blue jeans. You are a spiritual being having a human experience, whether you like that or not, whether you're aware of that or not. That's what it is, right? So guilt keeps us in line with these ego constructs and structures by, creating binaries of right and wrong that judge others, that cause blame, that push us towards an investment and a deeper investment and a reification of the ego structures that existed in the first place. So guilt is profound because it is really designed to keep us separate, right? And maybe not designed, but it is. It really serves a deleterious purpose when it comes to connecting with spirit and to remembering that we are all one. We're one. Physics has proven this. Like, it's a field, right? At its most oversimplified explanation, we are part of a field of energy. So technically, what we do to one person, we also do to ourselves. What we do to ourselves, we do to other people through the energy that goes out. Now, some folks might say that's pseudoscience. It's quantum physics, my friends. Like, again, it's also an oversimplification. So, but at its basis, that's really what it is. So when you hate yourself, you also works in a way to project onto others. So if you're in discord with yourself, you will project onto other people that same discord through things like blame, through things like guilt, through things like judgment, right? And it's participating in that game that really only serves to uphold the ego and separate you from everyone around you. So this is where this theme in particular is massive. And it's really when someone is in this state of guilt, so they're feeling guilty, and they're not just feeling guilty, but they have assumed an identity or set of beliefs that would have them act as though they are guilt, like that they're just bad, These beliefs can come from childhood. They can come from, as a type A person, I can say that there are times where I've had to stop and be like, oh, am I trying to put something into the world that's really helpful and useful? Or am I just trying to uphold this identity, this idea of type A, right? What does that mean? And how is that separating me from other people? So it's really this constant return to love, to quote the title of Marianne Williamson's book, which now you understand why it freaking works so well. So guilt, though, is also, I ask this question: if you find yourself confusing yourself as bad, not just feeling like feeling guilty, but feeling like you are the manifestation of guilt. Why is it that you need to feel bad and feel like you are bad in order to connect to your good? Right? This is one of the most profound questions that the Course has had me ask myself. And guilt is really, in a way, it's how we're taught to know who we are, right? Now, for me, faith is a both and proposition, right? I read tarot. I believe in a whole bunch of different esoteric and what people would call new age concepts and things like that. But I also grew up in a very Catholic household and very Christian household. And for me, it's both and, right? You can believe in some of the things there, and you can believe from some of the things elsewhere. And, a lot of people would disagree. But one of the books that I found super helpful in regards to this guilt piece, and I offer that backgrounder on my own experience in history. My own history has been kind of tangled up in a lot of blame and shame from folks who believed in specific religions like Christianity and Catholicism, and that was primarily because of me being queer and then coming out as trans, and now talking about these spiritual concepts that I've been believing in forever, but people refuse to see you where you are, and they project ideas of who you should be onto you, right? And that's where I think a lot of folks fell into this weird place of like, oh, well, that's not who you are. Yeah, it is. It's who I've been this whole time, right? But this is where the ego, these structures, create barriers that really we fail to actually see and know people in our lives where they are and who they are, right? But I give that aside to kind of introduce this particular book. It's different and separate from A Course in Miracles. But if you're struggling with this idea of guilt and punishment, feeling like there's this, you have to be punished in order to know good, because until you're punished and until you're guilty, how do you know when you're on the right track? Well, there's this fantastic book that I have read and I highly recommend. It is far more Christian centric. So this is for folks who are finding this video and who may have a foot in that door from childhood or beliefs otherwise. I read this a while ago, but I'm offering it as a sort of supplementary resource. But this book here, Unpunishable, Ending Our Love Affair with Punishment, and it is by Danny Silk, and it does take a look at a lot of biblical concepts and things. And because A Course in Miracles is technically a channeled text that speaks to Ascended Master Jesus, and Jesus speaks through that, there is a specific religious connotation to it. So for folks for whom that resonates, I felt like this book would be really helpful, who are moving past this idea of, you must, because you exist, you are punishable, you are deserving of it somehow. No. We're going to disrupt that narrative, right? But guilt is a way that we separate from one another. And that's a way that we also separate from spirit. That's a way that we also separate from our divine origin and our lineage, right? Like your divinity and blue jeans. I keep going back to it. It's the name of a card that I pulled in a reading a couple days ago or thereabouts. But nonetheless, these are 6 themes. These are 6 themes that are woven throughout A Course in Miracles that you'll see come up as we go through these workbook lessons. And I wanted to put together this video to share it. So if you liked this video, if you found it helpful, please do like and subscribe. Stick around next week. I don't know where next week is, but it's somewhere in between here. Next week, we're going to start to dive into the workbook lessons. And I am so excited to join you and to have you join me in A Course in Creativity. So with that being said, wherever you are on the time-space continuum, morning, afternoon, or night, I hope you are having a wonderful, healing, and light-filled and love-filled day, my friends. Take care.